The strains of classic blues drifted through the modest suburban home as Adrian Cross chopped vegetables for dinner. His strong hands moved with practiced precision across the cutting board, while soulful guitar riffs filled the kitchen. At 38, Adrian had built a life that seemed picture-perfect: a devoted husband, respected history teacher, and collector of vintage vinyl records that adorned the walls of their small dining room. "Sweet 16, and you're my teenage queen," he sang softly, glancing at the clock. It was 6:45 p.m. Isabella should have been home 45 minutes ago. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact photo. A snapshot from their wedding day 15 years ago. They had been high school sweethearts, together for 20 years, the kind of love story people swooned over. He set the phone down without calling, thinking she was probably caught up with work at the social services office. Returning to prepare the garlic bread, Adrian recalled their weekend plans to visit the state park. Isabella had seemed distracted when he mentioned it that morning, yet she had agreed nonetheless. The front door clicked open at 7:15 p.m. Adrian turned to greet Isabella, noticing a slight tremor in her hands as she set her purse down. "Traffic was terrible," she said before he could ask, her voice carrying an unfamiliar edge. "Sorry I'm late." Adrian studied his wife's face, the careful composition of her features, and the way her eyes wouldn't quite meet his. "No problem. Dinner's ready whenever you are." They sat at their small kitchen table, the same one they had bought at a garage sale when they first moved in. Isabella pushed her food around her plate, taking small bites between long silences. "I was at work," she replied when Adrian asked, her tone tinged with the usual detachment. "We had a difficult case today." "Want to talk about it?" she added quickly, citing confidentiality. "And all that?" Adrian nodded, noting how she kept her phone face down beside her plate. Its screen lit up periodically with notifications, as if she were clearly trying to hide something. The silence between them felt heavy and unfamiliar. In 20 years together, they had never run out of things to say to each other. Later that night, while Isabella showered, Adrian gathered the laundry. As he sorted through the clothes, a tissue fell from her coat pocket. He picked it up, frowning at the bold red lipstick stain. Isabella never wore red lipstick. She preferred subtle pinks and neutrals, claiming that anything bolder made her feel overdressed. The discovery unsettled him, but he said nothing. Instead, he began paying closer attention. Isabella's late nights became more frequent. Her explanations grew increasingly vague. She changed her phone's password, and small withdrawals began appearing in their joint account. Nothing suspicious on its own, but the pattern bothered him. One evening, while Isabella worked late once more, Adrian logged into their online banking. His stomach dropped as he scrolled through the transactions. Over the past 3 months, nearly $15,000 had been withdrawn in small increments. Isabella had always handled their finances, and Adrian had trusted her completely. He sat in their darkened living room, surrounded by the vintage records they had collected together, feeling like a stranger in his own home. The B.B. King record still spun on the turntable, but Adrian no longer heard the music. With trembling fingers, he installed a monitoring app on their shared laptop. Isabella rarely used it, preferring her phone and work computer, but Adrian knew she occasionally checked her personal email on it. He told himself it was wrong, that he should simply confront her, but something deeper, a primal instinct for self-preservation, drove him forward. 3 days later, the app captured her password. Adrian waited until Isabella left for work before opening her email. The first few pages revealed nothing unusual, just work correspondence, shopping confirmations, and newsletters. Then he found them, emails to and from someone named Julian Blackwood. Dozens of them, spanning months. Adrian's hands clenched as he read through the exchanges. They had started professionally enough, with Julian introducing himself as a local businessman interested in supporting social services programs. But the tone quickly shifted, becoming flirtatious and then intimate. They discussed their secret meetings, suggesting they could pass them off as work trips, and admitted that their feelings for each other were growing. Adrian researched Julian Blackwood, the owner of a luxury car dealership in town. Julian was married with 2 children, known for his charitable donations and business acumen. However, as Adrian dug deeper, he found posts and articles about Blackwood's aggressive business tactics and complaints from former employees regarding his ruthless nature. The text messages were even worse than the emails. Adrian found them backed up in Isabella's cloud account. Photos, intimate messages, plans for their future together, and details about the money she had taken. She had been spending it on hotels, gifts for Julian, and planning their escape. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Isabella had written. "What I have with Adrian is comfortable, safe, but with you, I feel alive." Adrian sat at their kitchen table, Isabella's phone in his hand as he read message after message. The blues record had stopped playing hours ago, leaving only the sound of his breathing in the quiet house. His hand shook, not with sadness or fear, but with a rage he had never experienced before. The kind, gentle history teacher who had sung along to blues records began to fade away. In his place, something darker emerged, a man capable of things the old Adrian would never have imagined. He set the phone down carefully, his movements controlled despite the fury coursing through him. Isabella would regret underestimating him. Everyone would. Adrian hadn't slept in days. Dark circles rimmed his eyes as he meticulously documented every piece of evidence he had uncovered. Their bedroom now felt tainted. He had moved to the guest room, telling Isabella he was fighting a cold and didn't want to infect her. She accepted the excuse easily, probably grateful for the space to continue her deception. His laptop screen glowed in the darkness as he researched divorce laws in Newford. The state's no-fault divorce policy meant Isabella's infidelity might not matter legally, but the financial fraud was a different matter. He downloaded bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts. Isabella had been thorough in covering her tracks, but not thorough enough. "How's the cold?" Isabella asked one morning, her tone carefully neutral. They barely spoke anymore, each dancing around the other in their own home like uneasy strangers. "Getting better," Adrian replied. "You're home late again tonight. Probably because of that big case," she queried while checking her phone for the 100th time that day. She didn't even try to make the lie sound convincing anymore. Adrian nodded and returned to his coffee. He had learned to control his features, to hide the rage that threatened to overwhelm him whenever he looked at her. Isabella had started picking fights, manufacturing arguments over trivial matters. The dishes, the laundry, his attitude. She was building a narrative, laying the groundwork to justify her actions when everything came to light. He heard her on the phone with friends, speaking in hushed tones about how distant he had become, about how unsupportive he was. The same friends they had shared for years now looked at him differently, believing Isabella's carefully crafted lies. Adrian recorded each slight, each manipulation, in his mental ledger. The debt grew larger by the day. That evening, Adrian compiled everything into a single file. Bank statements, emails, texts, hotel receipts, and placed it on Isabella's desk in the home office, which she rarely used anymore. Then he waited. A text arrived at 11:47 p.m. "Only my expensive lawyer will speak to you about the divorce." Adrian stared at the message, feeling something break loose inside him. Isabella had thought she held all the cards. She had believed that her wealthy lover and high-priced attorney would protect her. She had no idea what she had awakened in her quiet, kind-hearted husband. The next day, he called in sick to work, then drove to a small record shop across town. The owner, an elderly man who had sold Adrian many of his favorite albums, looked concerned when Adrian asked to sell his entire collection. "Are you sure about this, Adrian? Some of these are pretty valuable." The owner asked. "I'm sure. Life changes. Sometimes we have to let things go." Adrian replied steadily. The sale netted him nearly $30,000, more than he had expected. Over the years, he had accumulated other valuable items: first editions, collectible coins, art pieces, and by the end of the week, he had raised close to $50,000. Isabella noticed the missing records but said nothing. She probably thought he was having some sort of breakdown. Let her think that. Let her underestimate him one last time. Adrian reached out to Sebastian Shaw, an old college friend now working as a private investigator in Riverside. They hadn't spoken in years, but Shaw remembered Adrian fondly. They had been close once before life and distance intervened. Adrian Cross. Shaw's voice was warm over the phone. "It's been a long time, brother. What's up? I need your help. Your professional help," Adrian said. "Can we meet?" There was a pause. "You in some kind of trouble?" Shaw asked. "Not exactly. But someone else is about to be." They arranged to meet in Riverside. Before leaving, Adrian did his homework on Isabella's chosen attorney, Randolph, now known as Victor Monroe, of Monroe and Associates. He was one of Bristol's most aggressive divorce lawyers, known for his ruthless tactics and high fees. Adrian spent hours researching the firm, its cases, its financials, and a pattern emerged. Monroe and Associates had overextended itself, taking on too many high-risk cases. They had recently lost several major clients, and the firm was hemorrhaging money, even as it maintained a facade of success. Adrian booked a flight to Riverside, packing light. Isabella barely looked up from her phone when he told her he needed a few days away to clear his head. "Whatever," she muttered. "Just make sure your attitude improves when you get back." Adrian smiled, a cold, unfamiliar expression that would have shocked anyone who knew him. "Oh, it will. Things are definitely going to improve," he said, then left Isabella to her phone, her secrets and lies, and her plans that were about to crumble. The kind teacher who had loved vintage records and quiet evenings at home was gone. In his place stood a man capable of destroying everything and everyone who had betrayed him. The next move would shock them all. Riverside's winter wind bit through Adrian's coat as he met Sebastian Shaw in a small diner on the city's north side. Shaw had aged well, still fit, still sharp, though with gray threading through his dark hair. Shaw's eyes widened as Adrian laid out everything he had discovered. "Jesus, Adrian, I'm sorry, man," Shaw exclaimed. "What do you need from me?" Adrian replied, "Everything you can find on Victor Monroe and his firm, and on Julian Blackwood. I want to know every skeleton, every weakness, every pressure point." Shaw studied him carefully. "This isn't just about divorce anymore, is it?" he asked. "No," Adrian replied coldly. "This is about justice. This is about making them pay." They spent hours reviewing Shaw's findings. Monroe and Associates was in worse shape than Adrian had realized. Victor Monroe had been taking risky loans to keep the firm afloat, using client funds as collateral, a clear ethical violation. He had also been cooking the books, hiding losses from his partners. Julian Blackwood's car dealership was equally vulnerable. Shaw had uncovered evidence of fraudulent sales reports, money laundering through shell companies, and kickbacks from suppliers. Blackwood had built his empire on sand, and now Adrian held the shovel that would bring it all down. "I can help you expose them. Get the evidence to the right authorities," Shaw offered. "No," Adrian replied, his eyes gleaming with cold purpose. "I have something better in mind." They spent the next day setting up a shell company, using the cash Adrian had raised. Shaw connected him with financial experts who helped structure the deal. By evening, Adrian had secured a high-interest loan, using his liquid assets as collateral. "Are you sure about this?" Shaw asked as they finalized the paperwork. "It's risky," Adrian acknowledged. "But everything worth doing is risky." Adrian signed the last document. "But they'll never see it coming," he thought. He flew back to Bristol the next morning, dressed in an expensive suit he had bought in Riverside. The receptionist at Monroe and Associates smiled professionally as he approached her desk. "Good morning." Adrian crossed to see Mr. Monroe. I believe he's expecting me, she said, checking her calendar and nodding. Victor Monroe's office was exactly as Adrian had expected, filled with leather and mahogany designed to intimidate clients. Monroe rose from behind his desk, extending his hand. "Mr. Cross, welcome. Please have a seat." Adrian sat, studying the man who had planned to help Isabella destroy him. Victor Monroe was tall, well-dressed, with the practiced smile of a shark. Monroe launched into a standard pitch about the firm's success and future plans. "Actually," Adrian interrupted smoothly, "I think we should discuss the firm's current situation." Monroe's smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said. Adrian continued. "The overextended credit lines, the misappropriated client funds, the creative accounting. It's quite a mess you're in, Victor." The color drained from Monroe's face. "Who are you really?" he demanded. "Adrian Cross," Adrian stated, watching recognition dawn in Monroe's eyes. You're Isabella Cross's husband," Monroe stammered. "Indeed, and now you must face the consequences of your actions." Monroe's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor, and his hands began to shake as Adrian pressed on. "You should read the business news more carefully, Victor. That Riverside investment firm that bought your company yesterday, that was me." Monroe sputtered. That's impossible, is it?" Adrian placed a folder on the desk. "I now own Monroe and Associates, which means I own you, and you're fired." Monroe's professional facade crumbled completely. "You can't do this. I have clients' cases, important cases," he protested. Adrian's voice turned icy. "Pack your things. Security will escort you out," he commanded as he straightened his tie. "Oh, and Victor, if you're thinking of fighting this, remember, I have copies of all your creative accounting. One phone call to the Bar Association, and you'll never practice law again." Adrian then pulled out his phone as Monroe slumped in his chair, defeated. He dialed Isabella's number, watching Monroe's face as the call connected. "Hello." Isabella's voice was wary. "Hi, honey. Just wanted to let you know I'm back in town, and I'm afraid Victor Monroe won't be able to represent you anymore. In fact, he won't be representing anyone." Isabella asked, "What are you talking about?" "Check your email. I just sent you some interesting documents about your boyfriend's business practices, and our joint accounts are frozen pending a forensic audit. Have a nice day, dear." Adrian ended the call, savoring Isabella's panic. He turned back to Monroe, who still sat shell-shocked behind the desk that was no longer his. "Only those keys now, Victor, and your Bar Association ID. Your career in Monroe and Associates is over." Security arrived to escort Monroe out, and Adrian watched from his new office window as the former lawyer stumbled to his car, his reputation and career in tatters. Phase 1 was complete. Now for Blackwood and Isabella. Adrian sat behind his new desk at Monroe and Associates, now rebranded as Cross Legal Group. Reviewing the files that the Max team had uncovered, he noted that the leather chair still held Victor Monroe's impression. But the office had been stripped of its previous owner's pretentious decorations. In their place, Adrian had installed monitors displaying real-time financial data from Julian Blackwood's car dealership. "Sir," his new assistant Olivia knocked on the door. "Mr. Cross," Olivia said, placing a thick folder on his desk containing interviews from 3 former sales managers, 2 accountants, and a finance director, each willing to talk. She paused and remarked, "They'd really hate him. People often do hate those who abuse their power." Adrian replied as he opened the folder, "Thank you, Olivia." The testimonies painted a clear picture. Julian Blackwood had built his empire on fraud and intimidation. The sales numbers were inflated, and the books were manipulated through a maze of shell companies. Blackwood had used the dealership to launder money for local criminals, taking a hefty cut for himself. Adrian picked up his phone and dialed Sebastian Shaw. "Did you see what I sent?" Shaw asked without preamble. "I did," Adrian replied. Your team did excellent work, especially the testimony from the former finance director, who kept detailed records. Shaw confirmed. Blackwood threatened to ruin him if he ever talked. Now he's ready to sing like a canary. Adrian smiled. Make sure he talks to the right people. FBI, EC, state investigators. I want them all circling Blackwood's operation by the end of the week. Shaw responded. Already on it. What about the wife? Shaw inquired. Isabella. Adrian's voice hardened. Let's see how she handles watching her lover's life implode first. I have other plans for her. He ended the call and instructed Olivia. Get me the forensic accounting team. It's time to look at those joint accounts. The next few days were a symphony of destruction. Anonymous tips reached regulatory agencies, evidence appeared in prosecutors' offices, and Blackwood's business partners received disturbing information about his activities. The vultures began to circle, and Adrian watched it unfold from his office, directing each move like a conductor leading an orchestra of revenge. He received regular updates on both targets. Blackwood's biggest investor pulled out this morning, Olivia reported. His credit lines are being reviewed by 3 banks. And Isabella, she's still trying to find a new lawyer. No one will take her case. They all know the firm's new owner. Adrian nodded. Have the forensic accountants finish their review? Olivia responded. Yes, sir. They documented 57 separate instances of financial misconduct. Mrs. Cross diverted nearly $40,000 to private accounts and expenses related to Mr. Blackwood. Adrian said, Excellent. Send copies to her employer's ethics board. Anonymous, of course. The pieces were falling into place. Blackwood's empire was crumbling, and Isabella's carefully constructed lies were unraveling. But Adrian wasn't finished, not by far. He drafted a settlement offer that would strip Isabella of almost everything, knowing she would reject it. That wasn't the point. The point was to show her how powerless she had become. Your wife's here. Olivia's voice crackled through the intercom. She's demanding to see you. Adrian straightened his tie. Send her in. Isabella stormed into the office, her composed facade cracking. What are you doing? Running my business, she demanded. Adrian replied calmly. Did you receive the settlement offer? She protested. This isn't sane. You can't just take everything, as you plan to do to me. Adrian pulled out a file. $40,000, Isabella. That's what you stole for your little romance. Did Blackwood promise to take care of you after you left me broke? She stammered. That's not. Adrian continued, his voice ice cold. The difference between us is that I'm doing this legally, through the system you thought would protect you. How does it feel to be on the other side? Isabella's hands trembled. I'll fight this. I'll find another lawyer, she declared. Good luck. Adrian sneered. Rumors had spread about what happened to Victor Monroe. No one wanted to end up like him. Adrian turned back to his computer. You can see yourself out, he said, not watching her leave. Instead, he pulled up the latest reports on Blackwood's deteriorating empire. His investors were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, and his creditors were circling. Julian Blackwood paced his office at the dealership, phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean you're pulling the credit line? We've done business for 10 years, the banker demanded firmly. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but given the current allegations and pending investigations, we have no choice. Blackwood snapped. Allegations. They're lies. Who's been spreading these rumors? The FBI doesn't investigate rumors. Mr. Blackwood, good day. The line went dead. In a fit of rage, Julian hurled the phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. His empire was imploding, and he couldn't stop it. A knock at his door interrupted him. What? His assistant peeked in. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Cross is here to see you. Julian ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Send her in, he commanded. Isabella rushed into the office, her eyes wild. Julian, what's happening? I can't access any of our accounts. The joint ones with Adrian are frozen, and even the private ones we set up are empty." She exclaimed. "Not now, Isabella. I have bigger problems." Julian replied. "Bigger problems? They're investigating me at work. Someone sent them documentation of all the money I moved. I could lose my license." Julian's eyes narrowed. "What did you tell them?" he demanded. "Nothing. I would never." She insisted. "Are you working with him?" "Is that what this is?" Julian asked. "What?" "No," she stammered. Julian growled. "Adrian is destroying us both. We need to fight back." Isabella pleaded. "Us?" Julian laughed bitterly. "There is no us. There's me trying to save my business, and you're just another liability." Isabella stepped back as if slapped. "You promised we'd be together. You said you'd take care of me," she cried. Julian's tone turned scornful. "That was before your husband turned out to be remarkably brilliant at revenge." "Jesus, Isabella, what did you do to him?" Julian asked. She stammered. I just wanted to be happy." Julian replied. "Well, congratulations. Now we're both miserable." Suddenly, Julian's phone buzzed with another crisis demanding attention. "Get out. We're done," he barked. "Julian, please, get out," Isabella pleaded, but then she fled the office in tears. Meanwhile, at Monroe and Associates, now rebranded as Cross Legal Group, Adrian faced challenges of his own. The senior partners had called a meeting to discuss the firm's new direction. Douglas Irving, the oldest partner, addressed him. "While we appreciate the efficiency of your takeover, some of us have concerns about your methods." Adrian studied the room filled with expensive suits and worried faces. "Concerns about ethics, Mr. Irving? That's rich, coming from a firm that helped Victor Monroe cover up judicial bribes." The partners shifted uncomfortably. Adrian pressed his advantage. "Let me be clear. This firm will be cleaned up. The corrupt judges, the illegal practices, everything ends now. Those of you who wish to practice law ethically may stay. The rest should tender your resignations." One partner demanded. "Are you threatening us?" Adrian replied. "Not at all. I am offering you a choice. Reform or leave. But understand this. I have evidence of everything. Everyone. Choose carefully." The meeting ended quickly. Adrian returned to his office, now inundated with updates. Blackwood's biggest supplier canceled their contract, Olivia reported. His inventory is down to nearly nothing, and Isabella is still struggling to find a new lawyer. No one will take her case. They all know the firm's new owner. Adrian nodded, and Olivia added, "The forensic accountants have finished their review. They documented 57 separate instances of financial misconduct. Mrs. Cross diverted nearly $40,000 to private accounts and expenses related to Mr. Blackwood." Adrian replied. "Excellent. Send copies to her employer's ethics board. Anonymous, of course." In the federal courthouse, anticipation buzzed as Julian Blackwood was led into the courtroom, his designer suit replaced by prison orange. Adrian sat in the back row, watching his former rival shuffle to the defense table, shackled. "All rise. The court is now in session," announced the bailiff, as the United States District Court for the Southern District of Newford began proceedings, with the Honorable Judge Matthews presiding. Adrian remained seated until the last moment, wanting Blackwood to feel his presence. The once mighty car dealer's shoulders slumped as he was forced to sit in the row. Good. Let him squirm, Adrian thought. Judge Matthews addressed Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand you wish to change your plea." Blackwood's new public defender, a man no fancy lawyer would touch given his toxic case, stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. My client wishes to plead guilty to counts 1 through 17 of the indictment." "Very well, Mr. Blackwood. Please rise." Adrian leaned forward, savoring each moment as Blackwood admitted to his crimes. Money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion. The list went on, each admission another nail in his coffin. The defendant has provided substantial assistance to ongoing investigations, the prosecutor stated. However, given the scope and duration of his criminal enterprise, the government recommends the maximum sentence. Judge Matthews nodded gravely. Mr. Blackwood, your crimes represent a profound breach of trust. You have destroyed lives, corrupted institutions, and shown no remorse until now. I hereby sentence you to 20 years in federal prison. The gavel's crack echoed through the courtroom as Blackwood's legs buckled, and his public defender caught his arm to steady him. Adrian slipped out before Blackwood could be led away. In the courthouse lobby, he found Sebastian Shaw waiting. 20 years, Shaw whispered. That's harsh. It's perfect, Adrian replied, straightening his tie. His family is taking it. His wife filed for divorce this morning, taking the kids to her parents in California. Blackwood's reputation is so toxic that she's even changing their last name. Meanwhile, in the dealership, receivers had taken control yesterday, uncovering even more evidence of fraud, and the feds were now looking at additional charges. Adrian nodded and instructed, "Make sure Mrs. Blackwood's divorce attorney gets copies of everything. I want her to take him for whatever's left." His phone buzzed. A text from Olivia at the office. "Each license hearing has started. The board looks angry." Adrian smiled. One down, one to go. The state licensing board had convened a special hearing to address Isabella's misconduct. Adrian had ensured they received comprehensive documentation of her financial manipulations, her abuse of client trust, and her pattern of deception. He arrived at the regulatory board's offices in time to see Isabella emerge, tears streaming down her face. Her professional license revoked, her career over. She spotted him across the lobby and screamed, "Happy now? You've taken everything." Security moved to intercept her, but Adrian held up his hand to stop them. "No, Isabella," he said coldly. "You gave everything away. What for?" A calm man who is now going to spend 20 years in prison. "I'm sorry, but how many times do I have to say it? I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. You systematically destroyed our marriage while stealing our money and slandering my name." His voice remained cold. "Actions have consequences. What am I supposed to do now?" "I have nothing left," Isabella pleaded. "You have exactly what you plan to leave me with. Nothing." Adrian turned to the security guards. "Please escort Mrs. Cross out. She's causing a scene." He watched as they led her away, her sobs echoing through the lobby. No remorse softened his heart. She had chosen her path, and now she must walk it alone. Back at Cross Legal Group, Olivia had more updates. The forensic accountants had traced all of Isabella's financial misconduct. The evidence was damning. "The divorce filing is ready," Olivia reported. "With the documentation of her theft and fraud, we're seeking full restitution plus punitive damages." "Perfect. File it immediately, and make sure the press gets copies." Adrian settled behind his desk. It was time to turn private betrayal into public humiliation. The next week brought a media frenzy. Local newspapers ran exposes on Julian Blackwood's criminal empire and Isabella's role in it, their photos appearing side by side, depicting the corrupt businessman and his gold-digging mistress, both brought low by justice. Adrian watched his enemies' lives crumble with cold satisfaction. Blackwood headed to federal prison, abandoned by family and friends, while Isabella was reduced to begging relatives for shelter, her reputation destroyed. The hunter had caught his prey, and now he would watch them suffer. Adrian sat in his office at Cross Legal Group, reviewing the latest report from the Max team on Julian Blackwood's adjustment to prison. The former car dealer was not adapting well to life behind bars. His first week had been rough, as Max explained over the phone. Some inmates recognized him from the news. They don't like white-collar criminals who launder money for drug dealers. Any serious injuries? Nothing permanent yet, but he's requesting protective custody. Adrian smiled. Make sure the prison receives anonymous tips about his cooperation with the feds. Let's see how the other inmates react to that, he said. "That's cold, Adrian," someone remarked. "You were trying to destroy my life." Another voice interjected. He paused. "How's the other matter progressing?" "The media campaign?" he asked. "It's working. 3 newspapers are running stories about Isabella's professional misconduct, and social media is brutal. She can't show her face in public without being recognized." "Good. Keep it going. I want her name to become synonymous with betrayal." Adrian then hung up and opened his laptop. The latest headlines pleased him. "Disgraced social worker faces professional ruin." "Blackwood's mistress. A story of greed and betrayal. Hastily divorced. A cautionary tale." Olivia knocked on his door. "Sir," the real estate agent called. "The Blackwood mansion goes up for auction next week. The house where you lived with Isabella for 15 years, where she betrayed you. Now it will become a weapon in your arsenal," she announced. "The closing is scheduled for next week. Also, the Women's Shelter Organization is in contact. They want to move quickly on the renovation plans to convert your former home into a shelter for abused women." Adrian nodded. "It's poetic justice. Each woman helped will be a testament to Isabella's betrayal, a permanent monument to her shame." He picked up his phone and dialed back. "I need a favor. Find out where Isabella is staying. Her family must have taken her in." The information came back within hours. She had moved in with her sister in a small apartment across town. That evening, Adrian drove past the building, noting its shabby condition and worn paint. How far the mighty had fallen. Then his phone buzzed with another text from Isabella. "Please, we need to talk. I'm desperate." He typed back, "Desperation suits you. Consider it practice for your new life." Adrian closed the file. That concludes our business with Mr. Blackwood, he thought. Isabella's latest attempt at rebuilding had failed, as he had ensured all her attempts would be sabotage, with each job application mysteriously rejected, and every fresh start poisoned by anonymous revelations about her past. She tried moving to other cities and using different names, but Adrian's network found her each time, making sure her history followed her like a shadow. The Cross Center for Women in Crisis thrived, helping dozens of women escape abusive situations. Adrian attended fundraisers and made speeches about empowerment and justice, and no one suspected that his philanthropic image had dark roots. "You have changed this firm for the better," Douglas Irving, the senior partner who had once opposed him, admitted. "We're not just more profitable. We're more ethical." Adrian nodded, accepting the praise. He had learned to wear many masks, as a reformer, a philanthropist, a community leader, each concealing the cold truth beneath. Olivia brought in the afternoon mail, a letter from Isabella. "Should I shred it?" someone asked, but Adrian held out his hand. "I like having reminders." The letter joined others in his desk drawer, desperate pleas for forgiveness, for mercy, for a chance to explain. He kept them as trophies, proof of his victory. The penthouse offered views across to Havenport. Adrian stood at the glass, watching his city. Below, life went on. People working, loving, betraying. But up here, he had found a different perspective. The quiet teacher who loved vintage records was gone. In his place stood a man who had mastered the art of sophisticated revenge, who had learned that true power lies not in forgiveness, but in the calculated application of consequences. His phone buzzed. Another charity wanted his support. He had become a sought-after donor, his reputation now golden where once it had been tarnished by Isabella's lies. The transformation was complete, the victory total. His enemies lay broken, their lives ruined with a precision that bordered on art. Adrian smiled. A genuine expression now, not the mask he had worn in his old life. He was free, not just from the pain of betrayal, but from the weakness that had made him vulnerable. The sun set over Havenport, painting the sky in flames. Adrian watched it from his penthouse, a glass of wine in hand. Below, his city pulsed with life and possibility. He had learned valuable lessons, that kindness can mask betrayal, That trust is a weapon waiting to be turned against you, and that true strength lies in the ability to destroy your enemies so completely that they never rise again. The Cross Center would open tomorrow, its mission statement carved in stone, helping women reclaim their power. Only Adrian knew its deeper purpose, a monument to his revenge, proof that even charity could serve retribution. He lifted his glass to the dying sun, toasting his new life. The past was ash, but from it he had forged something stronger, something ruthless, something true. The Adrian Cross of old had died in the fire of betrayal. What emerged was a man far more dangerous, a man who had learned that mercy is weakness, and that revenge, properly executed, is the highest form of art. Epilogue. A decade of consequences. 10 years had passed since Adrian Cross transformed from a mild-mannered history teacher into one of Bristol's most influential figures. Cross Legal Group now occupied the top floors of a downtown high-rise, its chrome and glass facade reflecting Adrian's evolution from victim to victor. He sat in his office, reviewing quarterly reports. The firm had expanded to 3 additional cities, each branch specializing in corporate compliance and ethics, a fact not lost on him. His phone buzzed with a text from Sebastian Shaw, his most trusted ally. Guess who's up for parole? Adrian didn't need to ask. Julian Blackwood had served 10 years of his 20-year sentence. The former car dealer's first parole hearing was scheduled for next month. Send me the details, and make sure the parole board receives our full concerns package. The package contained comprehensive documentation of Blackwood's crimes, victim impact statements, and anonymous reports of his prison behavior. Adrian had spent a decade ensuring Blackwood's incarceration remained as uncomfortable as possible. Olivia, now the firm's chief operations officer, entered with coffee and updates. The Cross Center's 10th anniversary gala is next week, she reminded him. Local media wants interviews about its impact on the community. The Cross Center for Women in Crisis has helped thousands of women escape abusive situations. Your initial act of revenge has evolved into a nationally recognized model for domestic violence intervention. Adrian's smile held a dark irony. Schedule the interviews, he instructed, and have our PR team prepare the usual talking points about second chances and redemption. Olivia nodded, then hesitated. There's one more thing. Isabella was spotted in town. Adrian's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Isabella Cross had spent the past decade drifting between cities, unable to rebuild her life. Adrian's network ensured her past followed her everywhere, poisoning each attempt at a fresh start. Working as a home health aide under her maiden name and living in a small apartment on the south side, she was not doing well. Make sure her current employer receives an anonymous tip about her history of financial fraud, Adrian said coldly. Olivia made a note. What about her request to visit her mother's grave? She asked. Local cemetery, denied. Her mother's estate made it clear she's not welcome at family properties, Adrian replied. Adrian had spent years cultivating relationships with Isabella's relatives, positioning himself as the wronged victim who turned his pain into community service. They had chosen him over her, adding another layer to her isolation. A buzz came over the intercom. Mr. Cross, Sebastian Shaw is here. Sebastian entered, looking barely older than the day they had plotted Blackwood's downfall. His private investigation firm, partially funded by Adrian, had become the go-to agency for corporate intelligence. Blackwood's getting desperate, Shaw reported as he settled into a chair. He's tried reaching out to his kids again. They still won't respond. Adrian nodded with satisfaction. Blackwood's family had changed their name and moved to California, cutting all ties. His ex-wife had remarried a tech executive, and his children now called another man Dad. Even his prison counselor claimed he had reformed. Shaw continued, they all say he's a changed man, but people only change when consequences catch up. Adrian replied, that doesn't mean they deserve freedom. He pulled up his calendar, noting the date of Blackwood's parole hearing. A decade of planning had prepared him for this moment. Release the new evidence to the board, he instructed. including recordings of me bragging about my crimes to other inmates, the threats I made against witnesses, everything. Shaw raised an eyebrow. That'll guarantee a denial. Adrian nodded. Exactly. I want him to taste hope before we snatch it away. The intercom buzzed again. Sir, the director of the Cross Center is here for your meeting. Ava Chen, who had run the center for 5 years and transformed it from a local shelter into a comprehensive support network for abuse survivors, greeted him warmly. Wait until you see the numbers from last quarter. We've helped more women than ever. They reviewed success stories of women who had escaped abuse, rebuilt their lives, and found strength and survival, each a stark contrast to Isabella's descent into isolated desperation. The 10-year anniversary gala will be huge. Ava enthused. We're honoring you with the Humanitarian of the Year award. Adrian accepted graciously, playing his role as the compassionate community leader. The mask fitting comfortably now, smoothed by years of practice. After Ava left, Adrian pulled up the surveillance feed from the Cross Center. The building that had once been his marital home now stood as a monument to his revenge. Isabella had to pass it regularly, forced to see her shame transformed into a symbol of salvation. His phone buzzed with another update from his network. A job application Isabella had submitted to a care facility in Greenwood had been rejected, as had an apartment application in Lakeview. Each small defeat had been carefully orchestrated, each hope systematically crushed. As the sun set over Havenport, Adrian reviewed reports from his other ventures. The former Blackwood Luxury Motors dealership was now a thriving community center, and the corrupt judges he had exposed had been replaced by reforms he had helped design. His influence touched everything. Olivia returned with evening briefings. The parole board has received the Blackwood evidence. Initial feedback suggests unanimous denial. Good. Make sure his prison counselor gets copies too. Let's see how Blackwood feels when his last hope dies. Adrian's empire had grown beyond mere revenge. He had transformed retribution into an art form, wielding power with precise calculation. The quiet teacher who loved vintage records was long dead, replaced by a man who had mastered the manipulation of lives and consequences. A notification popped up on his phone. Another desperate email from Isabella routed through his screening system. Like all the others, it begged for mercy, for a chance to apologize for a small relief from the endless punishment. Adrian archived it without reading, adding it to his collection of trophies. A decade of suffering had not softened his resolve. If anything, time had hardened his determination to ensure his enemies never found peace. He pulled up the speech he had delivered at the Cross Center Gala, fine-tuning phrases about healing and second chances. The irony was not lost on him. He had built a reputation for helping others while systematically destroying those who had wronged him. Later, a final report from Sebastian Shaw arrived containing surveillance photos. Blackwood in his prison cell, gray and broken. Isabella leaving another failed job interview, her shoulders slumped. The images joined Adrian's collection, proof that consequences, when properly managed, never ended. Olivia brought the last updates before leaving. The parole board meeting is scheduled. They're expediting the denial based on the new evidence. Perfect. Make sure Blackwood knows exactly why his hopes were crushed. I want him to understand that freedom will never be an option. As the office emptied and night fell, Adrian stood at his window, watching his city. A decade of calculated revenge had transformed him from victim to victor, from prey to predator. He had learned that power was not in the ability to destroy enemies quickly, but in the patience to ensure they suffered endlessly. His phone buzzed one final time. A pleading message from Isabella, sent from a borrowed phone. Like all the others, it would go unanswered. Adrian had learned that silence could hurt more than words, that ignored pleas caused more pain than angry responses. The decade had taught him valuable lessons, that revenge was a dish best served continuously, that true power lay not in forgiveness, but in the sustained application of consequences, and that mercy was a weakness he could no longer afford. Adrian Cross, The kind teacher who had loved vintage records and quiet evenings was long dead. In his place stood a man who had mastered the art of sophisticated destruction, a man who had learned that revenge was not an act, but a lifestyle, a commitment to ensuring that enemies never found peace. He raised his glass to the city lights, toasting the empire he had built on the ruins of betrayal. The past decade had proved his theory that the best revenge was not swift or dramatic, but patient and relentless, a constant pressure that ground enemies to dust, year after year, without pause or mercy. The quiet teacher had become a force of nature, as implacable as time itself, and time, Adrian had learned, was the cruelest weapon of all.